Hello and welcome to Education Showdown, 4 Senate races that will shape Arizona. I am Dick Foreman, President and CEO of the Arizona Business and Education Coalition, one of 13 organizations sponsoring this event. In a recent statewide poll, 74% of Arizonans said they supported more investment in public education. While this program focuses on 4 Senate races, the questions and issues posed to these candidates are the same critical questions that voters throughout Arizona should be asking of all candidates for the Arizona Legislature. We thank you for taking the time to become an informed voter for public education, and don't forget to vote by mail or at the polls on November 8th.
Hello, I'm Jim Small, editor of Arizona News Service, and I'll serve as the moderator for this forum. All of the candidates who are participating in this event have been provided the questions they will be asked in advance. However, I may ask follow-up questions the candidates have not been provided in order to get a better understanding of where they stand on the issues. The candidates will have 90 seconds to answer each of the questions asked. Now, let's get started. Legislative District 18 is in Maricopa County and covers the Ahwatukee area as well as portions of South Tempe and West Chandler. The 2 Senate candidates for District 18 are Republican Frank Schmuck and Democratic candidate Sean Bowie. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks, Jim.
So we'll go ahead and get the questions started, I think first with Sean.
Okay.
Again, each of you will have 90 seconds to answer. When the school year started this year, there were more than 2,000 classrooms without a permanent qualified teacher. The Learning Policy Institute just named Arizona as the least attractive state for hiring teachers, largely due to the working conditions and compensation. What policies do you support to address this issue and enable public schools to hire, retain, and support teachers?
Well, this is a big problem, like you said. And here in Arizona, we have the highest teacher turnover rate in the country. A third of our teachers are leaving every 3 years. I have friends of mine who were teachers, who started the profession, who wanted to do a good job, and they've left because our starting salaries are some of the lowest in the country. Classroom sizes, I've heard 35, 40 kids in a classroom. So we can't expect to keep defunding education and expect good teachers to come to Arizona and stay in Arizona. So for me, I got into this race because education is an important issue for me. I'm a product of the local public schools in our district. And for me, the #1 priority of the legislature next session needs to be restoring education funding. We rank 48th in the country in K-12 spending. So we can't expect to fix this problem by continuing to defund it, by focusing on just passing tax cuts, more money for prisons. Education has to be the #1 priority. Because when we invest in education, it's going to lead to a stronger economy, stronger communities, and better jobs. So for me, when we talk about investing, for me, the #1 place for those resources needs to be in the classroom. It needs to be hiring more teachers so we can lower class sizes, and that, I think, is going to have the most dramatic impact on our education system. And when we show as a state that we're going to make a commitment to education above all else, that's going to send a message to educators, to teachers, to students that this is going to be a long-term priority for us. You can trust us to invest in this, and I think teachers will be more likely to stay. So I think it's a big problem, and I think we can solve that by making education the #1 priority when it comes to the state budget, and that's absolutely what I want to do in the state Senate.
Okay, great. Frank, what about you? What policies do you support to deal with this issue?
I'd like to put this issue kind of in perspective. We have about 50,000 teachers in the state of Arizona, and we mentioned 2,000 of them, so that's about 4%. So I think some of the things we need to look at first and foremost is transparency. I think transparency leads to accountability. New York is the #1 state in the nation for funding per student, and not only is it just because of money, but because they have a great program in their seethroughnewyork.net, which basically reveals to the public all government employees, their salaries, their costs, including education. I think competition is a great thing when it comes to education. I think there's a way to improve some of the concerns we have with our teachers, as far as salary, benefits, and what have you. But I think we also need to look at how we do business with teachers as far as their experience versus the seniority system. What I mean by that is we have lots of talented people in other states that may want to come to this state, particularly if we're able to improve our education and our economy at the same time, which I think they're a symbiotic relationship. We have a plan that's to eliminate the Arizona state income tax and we're going to replace it with a much smaller consumption fee. And in the end, we're going to generate more dollars, and we want to see them get directly to the teachers and the students. The teachers are our frontline employees. That's what needs to be funded first before any administration, and that's the direction I would head as the next state senator.
Okay, great. Frank, you'll get the next question first.
Sure.
Governor Ducey has said that Proposition 123 was the first step in addressing the shortfalls in the K-12 system. What are your ideas for the next steps, and what role will you play in building and sustaining the K-12 system?
I think he's exactly right. Prop 123 didn't go far enough, and I kind of alluded to it in the last question, but I'll do it again and say that, you know, transparency is extremely important. I think when we can reveal to the public what people are being paid from district to district and school to school, I think there's going to be some competition, and I think you're going to get the set of eyes of the public looking at education, not just people that are in the know and people that are in legislation, but people are going to say, how come that teacher's only being paid this much when this teacher over here is being paid that much? And how come this administrator is being paid much more? Why aren't we getting the dollars to the front end? And so again, I go back to our plan comes out of Arizona State University to eliminate the Arizona State income tax, replace it with a much more productive consumption fee that will protect people that are on fixed incomes by exempting basic food, clothing, and gasoline. People say, well, you've got to come up with 40%. Look, Arizona funds more than two-thirds, their budget is more than two-thirds of what many other budgets are for education. So we rank about 16th in the United States. And that being said, the highest ranked state only puts 43%. We're putting 35% of our budget into education. So I feel like we're doing a good job, but the money's not getting to the frontline employee, which is the teacher. And we've got to take care of the customer, who's the student and the parents. And to do that, we need to have transparency to create accountability.
Okay. Sean, what about you? What are the next steps following 123?
Well, the governor's right. It should only be the first step. And even with Prop 123 going into place, we still rank 48th in the country in K-12 spending. There are a lot of school districts where teachers didn't even get a raise, or maybe it was less than 1%, so it really didn't have a huge impact. So for me, when we need to look at a long-term strategy. I think too many legislators and too many people at the Capitol are focused on how do I get reelected, how do I focus on the next 2 years. We need to look at the next 5, 10, 20 years. And it's not just K-12 that needs help. I work at ASU, and I see the impact to the cost of higher education every day. We've cut more from our universities than any state in the country since 2009, almost a 50% cut. Tuition has tripled since 2009. A lot of our technical training programs have been cut and haven't been restored. So for me, this needs to be a comprehensive approach. If we want to grow our economy long term, better compete with some of our neighboring states that are making these investments and we're not, it's got to be K-12, it's got to be higher ed, it's got to be technical training. We have a lot of great technical training programs in our district through the Tempe Union High School District. Those programs need to be strengthened. And finally, our community colleges. I mean, Mesa Community Colleges in our district, they get zero funding from the state. And that's hurting a lot of these technical training programs that are preparing people for these 21st century economy jobs. So for me, Prop 123 is a first step, and you need to be doing more to invest in education, but specifically investing in the classroom. And like Frank said, making sure some of that transparency and accountability is there so the dollars are going to where they're really truly needed.
Okay, great. Sean, tell me one thing you would do to ensure that public schools are held accountable.
Great. Accountability is very important. We talk a lot about investment and restoring education funding, but it's important that we know where those dollars are going. So throwing more money at the problem isn't going to solve it. So for me, that money has to go into the classroom. It's working with our communities, our local school districts, the school boards, really making sure that those dollars are going into the classroom and they're going to hire more teachers, to lowering class sizes. So as a legislature, we fund the K-12 schools in our state. So there's a lot that we can do to work with those school districts and those school boards to make sure that those dollars are going to where they're needed. So that's something I would undertake as part of that effort to really restore education funding and get those dollars into the classroom where they belong.
Okay. Frank, same question to you.
Yeah, I just want to respond to his comment about cutting education in half, but then tripling the cost of education. So that's where I would come back to the question of accountability through transparency. We need to see why this is happening. If you've cut funding in half, like he said, and I don't disagree with maybe where the numbers are because I'm not sure, I haven't looked at those, but if you cut something in half but then triple the cost of it, why this exorbitant additional compounding? And so I come back to the transparency. I think if we're able to show to the public what people are being paid and where the money is going, you know, we have so many more eyes taking a look at what's going on. I fly for Southwest Airlines. We have done some great stuff at this company. I'd like to bring some of the things I've learned about people, about business and success to the legislature. One thing we say on the flight deck is if we have a jump seater get on board, we'd like to have that extra set of eyes to look to keep us safe. What's wrong with having the extra set of eyes of all the citizens and all the residents of Arizona looking at where our education funding is coming from? Just because you don't work in education doesn't mean you may not have a great idea that may help us go in a direction that makes it better for all Arizonans. The teachers is probably the most important. I've worked through the Southwest Airlines Adopt a Pilot program. I've taught in the 5th grade classroom. I've seen the pressures that are put on our elementary school teachers. And Sean's right, as well as what we've said here, is the younger the child, the smaller the class size should be. And we need to work on that, but we need to have funding to do it. And I think it's important that we look at how we find that funding. I don't think we take it out of the rainy day fund. I really think, you know, every 10 years we see an economic downturn. George Mason University did a study on the states in the United States and how prepared they are to weather an economic downturn.
So let's get to that question now, actually.
Okay, great.
If you support more funding for public education, how do you propose paying for it?
Well, again, I've said I think by systematically drawing down our income tax and replenishing it with a consumption fee, I think we're going to be able to broaden our base, not of the items that are taxed, but of the number of people that contribute. We have 44 million visitors to our state, but we only have 2.5 million income tax filers in the state. So we're talking about a 22-fold. Yes, not all of them live here 365 days a year, but we have a large number of them that stay here for 6 months or just under it to preserve whatever they have, where they go back and file their state income tax return or live in a different country. So I think by going after income through a consumption fee. And
you're talking about increasing basically generally the sales tax, correct?
Right, it'd be a sales tax on the existing items except for basic food, clothing, and gasoline. However, that protects people on a fixed income. We're not talking about replacing 4.5% with 4.5% of sales income. We're talking about drawing it down 1% a year, bringing up potentially 1/4% a year to ultimately where we would replace by 1 to 1.25 cents. This has come out of ASU. This is the study done by Stephen Slavinsky, the economist, who works in the School of Liberty at the W.P. Carey School of Business. We have some other people on our team that are looking at this. I know the governor's supportive of drawing it down. North Carolina just approved a 10-year plan to eliminate theirs, and they've become the 8th state in the United States. What I was saying before, though, about an economic downturn, which I think is extremely important, because we don't want to go through what we went through in 2008 and a little bit after 9/11 that we saw also. But every 10 years an economic downturn occurs. George Mason University did a study on all the states and how prepared they are. Arizona's ranked in the bottom half, but in the top 10 are 4 of the 7 states without an income tax. Take yourself up to 20, and you've got 6 of the states without an income tax. I think there's some merit there, and I think we need to be prepared for an economic downturn so we don't go through what we did. Okay. But remember, we got to raise the tide, education and business at the same time, and we've got a plan to do it.
All right, great. Sean, same question to you. If you support more funding for the K-12 system, how do you propose paying for it?
Well, we have the resources now. I mean, we've made decisions over the last 10 years in our state to continually reduce taxes, to invest in private prisons, and to continually cut education. So for me, it's about electing legislators who are going to make education the #1 priority. I don't want to use all the rainy day fund. I'd use a portion of it, because the whole point of using the rainy day fund and some of the surpluses we've had is to make those investments so we can grow the economy, so we have a bigger tax base. So when that downturn does come, we're in a better position. The last downturn, we were so reliant on the housing industry. We weren't prepared. So the whole point of investing now and making those targeted investments is to make sure that we're better prepared. When that downturn comes, we have more revenue coming in.
Is the point of the rainy day fund, though, to use it to invest in
a portion
in the state,
of it,
or is it to actually be, as like the name implies, a kind of a contingency fund for a downturn?
Well, a portion of it. I mean, we've cut taxes so much. We, as a state, have cut taxes every year, I think, the last 25 years. And we have already one of the 10 lowest state income tax rates in the country. Every state that borders us, except for Nevada, has a higher state income tax rate. California's is 3 times the size of ours. So when I talk to business owners, when I talk to people who live in our community, the state income tax is not a big concern for them. There was an Alliance Bank survey that was just done that asked CEOs, what issue is most important to you when you're looking at investing in an area? And they said the number one issue was education. Intel is a big employer in our district. They have a plant across the street from where I went to elementary school. And their CEO said several years ago that if he had known 20 years ago what he knew now about our lack of commitment to education, he never would have invested here. Okay. So for me, when we look at growing the economy long term, if we get rid of 40% of the revenue in our budget, for me, that's a risky approach. And when I look at where our state is now in terms of our budget, in terms of our education system, the cuts that we've made, the number one priority has to be investing in education. And then once the economy is growing and we have a surplus, then we can talk about tax reform.
Okay. I'm going to give one more question. Do for about 45 seconds here to answer this. Tell me one thing the state should do to ensure there's accountability for empowerment scholarship accounts.
So empowerment scholarship accounts are vouchers, and I supported the original intent of ESAs. It was largely for students with special needs who maybe needed a different school that was better equipped for them, so that was something I supported. But now there's an effort in the legislature to expand vouchers statewide, and what we've seen in other states that have done this is it largely goes to fund tuition at private schools for parents that were sending their students there anyway. So it's taking money out of our public schools and it's funding private schools where there's less transparency, less accountability. The more programs like this that we have, the more money that's coming out of our public schools. So if we keep expanding this statewide, we'll be 50th in investment in education in the next couple of years. So for me, we need to be talking about more investment in our public schools where there is that transparency, where there is that oversight, and make sure those dollars are going.
Okay, Frank.
Arizona is a leader in the nation on ESAs, and a report just came out in October. There's less than 1% fraud with it. About 2,000 students, a little over, about the same amount of teachers that are missing are the ones that they did the audit on to show that. I think, though, if we expand the ESAs, we need to have accountability. I come back to transparency. If you're going to take the taxpayers' dollars, you need to show what you're doing with it. And I think that's the real answer here to improving education in the state. But again, no employer would train someone to do something without them and then have them go work for their competitor. We're seeing that as we subsidize higher education. 1 in 2 students are graduating from our major universities here in the state and going to work somewhere outside of the state. That's not good for Arizona. We need to bring education and business up at the same time.
Okay, great. Gentlemen, thank you both very much for coming.
Thank you.
Legislative District 6 covers portions of Coconino, Gila, Navajo, and Yavapai counties, including the communities of Cottonwood, Sedona, portions of Flagstaff, and many of the communities along the Mogollon Rim. The 2 Senate candidates for District 6 are the incumbent, Republican Sylvia Allen, and Democratic candidate Nikki Bagley. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
So, we're going to go ahead and start with Senator Allen, I think, for the first question here. When the school year started this year, there were more than 2,000 classrooms without a permanent qualified teacher. The Learning Policy Institute recently named Arizona as the least attractive state for hiring teachers, largely due to working conditions and compensation. What policies do you support to address this issue and enable public schools to hire, retain, and support teachers?
Thank you, Jim, and also want to thank you and those who invited us to come here today. This is exciting to talk about education in Arizona. There are so many positive things to talk about, but one issue we have that is serious is our teacher shortage. And so I do want to address that, especially this session. I've been telling education groups that this should be our #1 issue. In fact, the teacher problem is nationwide. It isn't just here in Arizona. We're having concerns in this country about how to keep teachers and to help teachers. One of the bills I carried this last session was to make it simpler for teachers in other states to be able to come and teach in our state without spending a lot of money and having to go through more education. That they could come, if they're certified, they could just come right to our state, and I know that might help. I'm also going to be carrying legislation that will help pay student loans for teachers that will stay and teach in Arizona. And also, we have such a shortage in our science, physics teachers, special ed teachers, and we need to have solutions and ideas to help encourage them to go into that field, and paying student loans is one way that we can do that. So I'm going to be carrying that legislation. I have a daughter that is a teacher. Our teachers also, I believe, suffer with a lot of morale issues. I mean, we put a huge burden on teachers. We expect them to be social engineers and to take on numerous problems that are in our communities and with our children. And I know that they want to be able to go in the classroom and teach and have the love of teaching. And so we need to find ways, encourage our superintendents to deal with these issues too, to find out what it is that can make these teachers, give them more support in their training, whatever we can do to keep them. But it is an issue we need to work on.
Great, thank you. Nikki, what about you? What kind of policies would you support for this?
Absolutely. Teachers have been shown to be one of the most influential factors in student success, so it has to be a priority for our state to look at this issue. I believe it's not a supply issue. If you look at the Department of Ed and all of the teachers that are certified, I believe we have enough teachers in Arizona to fill the supply, but we need to look at teacher support, and that doesn't include just pay, although it is a big piece of it. My sister-in-law is a teacher. I've talked to dozens of teachers, while campaigning, and that is consistently a concern for them. So pay is important, but we have to focus on supporting teachers with other means, programs that can help them give their students the best education, but also the tools. The soft capital funding is really in a crisis state right now, and making sure teachers have the correct tools to implement their highest quality education is very critical.
Okay, great. So next question, Nikki, I'll go to you first for the first 90-second answer. Governor Ducey has said that Proposition 123 was the first step in addressing shortfalls in the K-12 system. What are your ideas for those next steps, and what role would you play in building and sustaining the K-12 system?
Absolutely. This has to be a first step. We're still probably $1,000 per pupil short of education funding compared to where it was pre-recession. And so the work cannot be over. Prop 123 was a good step forward for funding, but it only restored 18% of what has been cut. And so we need to look at not only the next step, but also what's the next long-term step. What I see in addressing our almost constant education crises is that we have built in fiscal cliffs into many of our education funding sources. And I'd like to see dedicated funding in our general fund and dedicated funding for education so that we're not, facing our voters on a constant basis to meet educational funding needs.
Okay. Senator Allen, what about you? What do you see as the next steps after 123?
Well, first, Prop 123 was a huge, major step, and I was very excited to be part of that. To be able to, we desperately needed more money for education, and that did put more money there, and we were able to do it without raising taxes. And I want to point out that we didn't get one Democrat on the floor to help us to get that bill on the ballot. And that's disturbing to me. We also added another $250 million this year to education above what Prop 123 will bring in. However, what we've got to concentrate on and be sure that we help is the pie. I don't want us to keep dividing up the pie. Right now, 50% of our general budget fund is going to education. We've got to grow that pie. And as the economy grows and we can stabilize it, yes, we will find more ways that we can sustain improving our education. And one idea, and I know you're going to talk about it later, is Prop 301. I'm very excited about the opportunities we have there of having a dedicated fund to increase the compensation to our teachers.
Okay. Well, we'll get to the Prop 301 hopefully in a little bit here. But
yeah.
So tell me one thing that the state should do to ensure that public schools are held accountable.
Well, I carried the bill this year for the new from A to F grading program. I'm sorry. Anyway, I'm excited about that. I really, because I want our schools to be graded on more than just a test, because we have exciting stories to tell about our schools. I'm really encouraged when I go into the schools and see the positive things they're doing. So now parents can see that the school is also making progress in their AP classes, getting kids ready for college. They can see that the school is doing wonderful things for CTE classes. And and high school graduation dropout. about? What kind of programs are schools using that are helping that situation? So this is going to be a great improvement to help hold our schools accountable. And I want to also, at the same time, be able to get out to the public the positive things the schools are doing, and the taxpayers knowing how much we appreciate that $10 billion they have given to us for education, by them being able to positively see that their dollars are working in some areas. And yes, we need improvement, but we have a good story to tell in Arizona.
All right, great. Nikki, what about you? What one thing would you do to ensure accountability for public schools?
Well, I agree with Senator Allen in that we have to get beyond a single test in looking at the achievements of our schools. But as far as accountability goes, one thing that I see is that district public schools are held to a very high level of accountability and reporting. And I see that there are some of our public schools, namely charter schools, who are not held to the same standards. And so, you know, while we have some of the very best public charter schools in the country in Arizona, I believe that we could do more to make sure that our tax dollars are being spent wisely. As mayor of Jerome, I balance the budget every year. Fiscal responsibility is really, really important to me, and I see that that's one area that we could do more to make sure that our tax dollars are being leveraged for quality education in the state.
Okay. If you support more funding for education, and I think from your comments earlier, it sounds like you do, how do you propose paying for it?
Absolutely. Well, I think the business community has been very, very invested in seeing additional funding for schools. And I think really the next step starts with coming back to that community and continuing to develop solutions that can bring long-term funding for our schools.
Okay. Senator Allen, if you support more funding for schools, how would you pay?
Well, of course. We're going to have to always have this challenge. I mean, my grandchildren, I have 19 grandchildren, so of course we have a challenge in how we continue to fund our education and provide the programs that we need for these children. And it goes back to what I said again about how important it was. We were able to get our, after the $3 billion deficit, to get our budget structurally balanced. And I believe that's why we had such a good year this year, and being able to have extra money to be able to put back into, pay back the universities, that $200 million that we did. Those are things I hope we can continue to do, and I think we will, as we balance the whole pie, because we're also very concerned about other issues in the state, as you know. Mm-hmm. So again, I go back to, I think we can find solutions like we did with 1, 2, 3. Let's keep thinking outside of the box. Let's look at different solutions.
I do have one follow-up, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, and I'll give you a little bit of a chance to respond to it. Sure.
Sure. So as far as funding solutions go, one thing that I talk to people a lot, as a state, we've cut taxes 24 out of the last 26 years, but what I'm going to make sure we do at the state level is not continue to put the tax burden for the hard costs associated with education onto rural districts who can least afford it. So I've seen so many school districts go towards raising taxes on properties in order to cover the deficit that the state is not covering.
Yeah, Senator.
Well, we certainly need to reform the way we budget education in Arizona. Mm-hmm. I've been saying that for 8 years now, that we need to reform it. But, and definitely rural schools do struggle they don't have as much property that they can tax because of the areas where they live. We try to equalize that out across the state, but they still have unique challenges, and that is true. But the taxes, a lot of that is locally, where people, the districts have the ability to bond, and they ask their taxpayers to bond, and most of the times they're willing to do that. Sometimes they aren't. But certainly reform is something I'm more than willing to look at.
Okay. You mentioned Proposition 301 earlier, yes, which brings in annually about $550 million through a sales tax, set to expire in 2021. Do you support updating or renewing Proposition 301?
Oh, definitely. In fact, I'm wanting to see if we can get it on the ballot in 2018. I think we need to come out very strong that we want to keep this tax, that it's important to sustain it. It has brought a lot of money that we can't afford to lose. However, I believe that we should get together, collaborate, compromise maybe even, and let's take a real good look at it. I'm interested within that tax to see if we can't do some funding for special education. That's a whole other issue that we could spend hours talking about. And but teachers' pay is #1 to me. And if we're going to open that up and look at it, I think the first reason we do that is see how can it be this funding source to help us with compensating our teachers and bringing up. We're number 28th in the country in the average teacher pay. I'd love to bring that up.
Okay. Nikki, Proposition 301?
Yeah, absolutely support its renewal. It's really critical. If we're going to make progress, we need to have that base funding. From what I understand, this proposition puts about over $500 million into our school systems, and so that's something that's got a fiscal cliff ahead of us if we're not able to renew that. I would hate to see the state making the decisions for how to cover that hole in that funding source. You know, just a few years after that expires, Prop 123 funding expires. And so those two things combined, you're looking at close to $750 million of education funding impact. So we have to be building on the solutions that we already have, but keep both of those in place.
Now, Nikki, earlier you mentioned the tax cuts, and since the mid-1990s, the state has consistently cut taxes, and tax cuts that were passed since 1999 will reduce general fund collections by about $900 million each year once they're fully phased in, according to what budget analysts say. The governor and others have advocated for completely eliminating the income tax, which brings in about 40% of the state's general fund revenues. How would you balance tax policy and education funding if you're elected?
Right. Well, I think we need to take a major look at our tax code. I think something that hasn't been done is a strong fiscal analysis of where our tax cuts and incentives are paying off. Some of these programs are really working hard for us. They're generating revenue. We want to keep those. But the ones that aren't performing so well, that are costing dollars from coming into our general fund, I think it's time to take a look at where we can make adjustments. And so that's a really important piece, again, of being fiscally responsible and being a good steward of public dollars. But, you know, additionally, when I went through the school system, we were 26th in the nation for school funding. And these tax cuts, coupled with the recession, has landed us in 48th position. And that's after you adjust for cost of living. And so it's an issue that's really important to me because I was able to grow up in Arizona, get a quality education, get a job in my field, and I was able to pay off my school loans. I know that opportunity window is shrinking for the generations to come, so it's really important to me. I think it's been a strategy that's worked in Arizona before to invest in education in order to pull out of an economic recession. You know, in the 80s, we saw a little economic downturn, and it was that investment in education that really helped lay the groundwork for us crawling out of that and being successful. And I'd like to see that be our same strategy today.
Okay. Senator Allen, what about the balance between tax policy and education funding?
Well, yes, I really think it was a positive thing. I'm a kind of a Milton Friedman junkie person. And to allow people to keep more of their money, I don't see it that the state lost that money. In fact, I see it that $900 million is being allowed to stay within the economy to keep businesses solvent. How would we know, since this was during the recession when we were losing so many business? My husband and I lost our small business during the recession. And how do we know how many more businesses we would have lost if we hadn't relieved some of that burden on them? Yet I believe leaving that money in the economy fuels it and helps it to come swinging back to us, and it has helped us where we are today. It has created more jobs. Forbes magazine has said we're number 2 now with job creation. It has proved to help Arizona get back on her feet from the recession. So I believe but you know, here I am advocating that we keep Prop 301. I think it's a matter of looking at things and weighing them. But of course, the overall picture is important for us to look at, and I think it was a wise step for us to do. I think it's proving to be positive, and I think at the same time we are starting now. Next year, our revenues will be back where they were in 2008, I believe. So we are slowly getting there, and that's a positive. But I think it's from making good, sound budget decisions, not overspending. If we would have rushed out into our economy and taken $3 billion out of the economy, it would have been, I think, a very negative hit, and we would have lost some more jobs during that time.
Okay. One quick question, just kind of a quick lightning round, quick yes or no here. The private school tax credits automatically increase by 20% each year, regardless of student growth, inflation, or other factors. Do you think that that's good public policy? I'll go with Senator Allen.
Yes, and actually that 20% is a ceiling. And some years we don't reach that, and some years we have.
Okay.
But that allows underprivileged neighborhoods and families to be able to choose where and it helps these kids. And that is tax dollars that we're going to have, that we have to spend, and so we would have to spend educating them anyway.
Okay. Nikki?
No, I don't approve of that. I don't think it's good fiscal policy, and I don't think it's good public policy. You know, this is an area where we see very little accountability, and it's also, you know, it's an area that that I think needs to be tightened down a little bit. You know, it's very clearly taking money out of our general fund, and I'd like to see the legislature be able to make those decisions.
Okay. Well, I think that's about where we're going to have to end it. Thank you very much, ladies, for coming down today.
Thank you.
Legislative District 28 is in Maricopa County and covers much of the north central and Arcadia areas of Phoenix, as well as Paradise Valley and parts of Scottsdale. The two Senate candidates for District 28 are both currently representing the district in the House of Representatives. Republican Kate Brophy-McGee and Democratic candidate Eric Meyer. Welcome to you both. So we'll go ahead and get started. Kate, we'll give you the first question. When the school year started this year, there were more than 2,000 classrooms without a permanent qualified teacher. The Learning Policy Institute recently named Arizona as the least attractive state for hiring teachers, largely due to working conditions and compensation. What policies do you support to address this issue and ensure that public schools are able to hire, retain, and support their teachers?
Well, thank you for that question. I served on a school board for almost 10 years, and my first recommendation is to value teachers as the professionals that they are. We need to address compensation and working conditions as part of that value. We need to establish that as a policy statewide and mold our thinking around it. Good teachers, great teachers are leaving, and they are not being replaced by great teachers. And the way that we have to approach it is through a funding approach, working conditions approach. We have to clear the barriers, and I think we'll address it farther in. We have to clear the barriers in terms of funding and make sure that they have the resources to teach students and hold them accountable. And that includes technology, classroom supports, textbooks, things that they don't have in the classrooms now, and make sure that we can then offer as competitive a package to teachers as Nevada and California and some of the other states that are taking our good teachers.
Eric?
Thanks. Well, you know, this isn't a new problem. Last year we started short 1,000 teachers. 25% of the teachers that are now working in our school are eligible for retirement in the next 3 years. In our budget that we offered up, it didn't make it through the process. We had a plan to address the teacher shortage, both through mentoring and through retention bonuses. Our salaries are much lower than all the surrounding states, so the only way we can increase teacher retention here is by increasing investment in education. We now have, since 2008, made some of the largest cuts to public education in the history of the state. We're spending less than $1,000 now, adjusted for inflation, than we were than we are now. So, you know, we have put our teachers at a disadvantage. And they're making an economic choice to leave the state. So we need to focus on funding education. Our caucus and I continue to offer up solutions within the budget structure as it exists to increase funding to our schools, but the governor and my Republican colleagues have failed to make those investments. We had a $1 billion surplus this year. We could have used some of those dollars to recruit and retain teachers, and we just didn't do it.
Okay. Governor Ducey has said that Proposition 123 was the first step in addressing shortfalls in the K-12 system. What are your ideas for the next steps, and what role would you play in building and sustaining the K-12 system?
So, Prop 123 was a solution to the inflation funding lawsuit that existed because the legislature didn't abide by the will of the people and fund our schools appropriately for inflation. So it did move us forward. It only actually was settled at 72% of what was supposed to be delivered to our classrooms. In this last year's budget, a second step could have been using some of that surplus I just talked about for funding our schools. I offered up an amendment for an additional $116 million to go to our schools. It failed, unfortunately, and Kate didn't support that amendment. And now moving forward, we have a bigger challenge because of some of the decisions we've made in the budget. So we have to look at making education a #1 priority, like I have for the 8 years that I've served in the House and for the 8 years I served on the Scottsdale School Board. So every time I do a budget with my caucus, we look at how we can find those dollars to invest in education. That's our #1 priority. And we can't continue to give special interest tax cuts, invest in private prisons, and all the other things we do if we don't put education first.
All right. Kate, what are next steps after Prop 123?
Well, I am so grateful to be having this conversation because if Prop 123 had not passed, then we would still be mired in a lawsuit that had gone on for over 5 years. We'd be paying attorneys and not putting money into the classrooms. It's important to point out that my opponent opposed Prop 123, did not support it, did not vote for it. Having established 123 as the platform, we must go forward. And the very first thing I want to do is to renegotiate Prop 301, the sales tax increase. We have to continue, as Prop 123 did, to put sustainable, predictable funding into our schools. That's the first thing. And the second thing is to address the teacher shortage immediately with resources and working conditions. And the third thing is to address capital needs for schools. I served on the school facilities board for almost 6 years, and we put a lot of money into deficiencies correction. It is much, much better if we address that up front. And with our deficits, we've not been able to do that. It's also important to note that despite the proclaimed $1 billion budget surplus, we have a $50 million structural shortfall as of today.
Yeah. Now, tell me one thing, Kate, that the state should do to ensure that public schools are held accountable.
I think public schools, Arizona schools, are very much held accountable. We have put in some remarkable reforms over the past couple of years. What needs to stop happening is that we keep changing direction. We need to go with the reforms that we put in place, and I commend our teachers and our educators, our administrators, for putting those reforms into place under very difficult circumstances. But we need to go forward with those reforms and let them play out, and we need to figure out how to fund them. The second thing, we must adopt a policy, a law that says we do not do policy and formula changes in the middle of the night with no public discussion or debates. There's much better ways to do things when it comes to education.
Okay. Eric.
We have put accountability measures in place. So we rate our teachers, we rate our principals, we give letter grades to our schools and to our districts. What we don't do is fund our schools. And in particular, those DNF schools and our charter schools that are underperforming, we need to invest in those schools and put quality teachers in the classroom and principals on those campuses. And until we do that, the accountability measures don't mean much because we haven't invested in our schools. Back to Prop 123, Kate knows that because we've done this before, I supported the increases in funding. What I didn't support was the rate on the state trust lands and the caps and triggers that were in that. And we were on a stage together at Saguaro High School where I was at a rally supporting Prop 123 after it passed the legislature because that was the only option we had. So I'm very supportive of funding our schools. The teachers were the biggest proponents of Prop 123. They've endorsed me in this election cycle. So I think it's a little disingenuous to say that I don't support additional funding for our schools.
Okay. Well, let's talk about additional funding for schools. How would you propose paying for it?
Well, there's a number of ways. One, we had money in the budget that we could have used to do that. Two, if you look at the tax cuts that we've given over the past 8 years, we've given about $900 million in tax cuts. Those tax cuts were mostly to special interest entities, corporations, and there's no evidence that they've created a single job in the state. If we use those dollars to hire teachers, I could show you where those jobs were. So we should look at suspending those until we actually fund our education system. Restore full-day kindergarten, reduce class sizes, get technology in the classroom, and a whole bunch of other things. Two, we give out corporate STO tax credits that are multiplying at about 20% a year, and we shouldn't be doing that. We don't even fund our own inflation for our public schools, but for the corporate tax credits, we're doing it at 20% a year. Just those two things I mentioned alone, the suspension of tax cuts and the corporate tax credits, would amount to about $450 million in revenue. We had money in the general fund. If we put that $116 million in, that would have been $550 million. And then I think moving forward, we have to go to the voters and restore Prop 301, and what that will look like and whether there'll be a facilities component in that remains to be seen, but I think we need to, at least I will be advocating for those types of things. And then long term, we need to find a defined revenue stream that's dedicated to education. So, and I know there are some proposals on the table around energy that we sell out of state, and other things. So
okay.
I'll stop going. Go ahead.
Kate, how would you propose paying for additional funding for schools?
Well, the first conversation that needs to happen, it has to do with Prop 123 in place. We must renew Prop 301. It's interesting to note that the support for Prop 123 occurred after a no vote. Going forward, I think you have to put every idea that is out there, and there are a lot of those ideas out on the table, and you have to have that discussion. It's time to go big. It's time to go bold. You need to look at everything, and there are a lot of solutions like the ABEX solution that's out there, and get the people in the room that need to have the conversation with a stable or relatively stable budget, with still a small structural budget deficit. We can look at having those conversations. And I would argue that I am by far the best person to do that in the LD 28 Senate race. And the reason that I say that is because I have a track record and a history of putting together coalitions, partisan and bipartisan, to solve problems, to solve very complex problems. And it's been my honor to do that on some other big issues that the state has faced. This is the next big conversation to have. With the resolution of the lawsuit and the passage of Prop 123, which I worked very hard to make happen, we're in a position to finally have those conversations. And I would really be honored if I could be part of them.
Okay. I think both of you guys have mentioned Prop 301 a couple times. It sounds like both of you support renewing the ballot measure when it expires in 2021. It obviously brings in about $550 million a year into the K-12 system. Would there be any changes for it that you would see going forward? How would you, just basically a renewal of it, or would you like to see it changed and adapted for the next 20 years?
I think it's part of an overall conversation on education and education funding that needs to take place. At a bare minimum, it needs to be renewed. But I have heard my colleagues talk about enhancing Prop 301 revenues, and we've had the experience of Prop 301 for a period of time. Maybe there's some fine-tuning or some adjustments that we can make, but we absolutely need to go forward. Prop 123 won't work unless you renew Prop 301.
Okay. Eric.
Well, I think that we definitely need to figure out how to invest more in our schools. Prop 301 is going to be renewed or expire in 2020, and we'll lose that 0.6% sales tax. Prop 123 was a first step. I'm hoping there's additional steps, but with Prop 301, I think we'll have to see what the landscape looks at that point. If we continue to cut funding like we have under the Ducey administration. We'll be desperate for those monies. 74% of the voters right now are looking for increased funding for our public schools. It doesn't matter whether they're Republicans or Democrats or independents. So I'm hopeful that I'll be down there to have those discussions with my caucus and with the Republican caucus, just like I have over the past 8 years that I've been down there. I'm fearful that if it doesn't pass, our schools will be in even more dire straits, and it's a must-pass resolution.
Tell me one thing that you would do to increase early education options for all Arizona children, particularly those that come from low-income families.
Well, we passed First Things First. We've prevented the
voters did.
The voters did. That's correct. Thank you. The voters passed First Things First, we've tried to raid that multiple times. I've opposed those raids on First Things First because that's where we are getting some early childhood education needs met. I guess it was 12 years ago now, or even longer ago, worked on getting the funding for full-day kindergarten, just as a parent advocate down at the Capitol. We should restore full-day kindergarten. We cut that, and we have the opportunity to restore that if we elect the right people. And then we have the fourth highest rate of childhood poverty in the state. There are kids that definitely need help that come into our system unprepared for kindergarten. So programs that while I was on the school board in Scottsdale that we had for early childhood education could be replicated around the state.
Okay.
The research shows that the earlier a child is exposed to enriched experiences, the more quickly and the better you can enhance the trajectory of their educational path. So I would like to see a partnership with First Things First. They just came through an audit with flying colors. We have a tendency at the legislature, a very strong tendency, to shoot at them, and that's wrong. We should not do that. We need to sit down. We need to make a partnership, come to a partnership and a conversation and agreement about how we can work together. And this is just one solution. There are lots of things that we need to do, but we can work together to build early quality child care situations where children are exposed to enrichments, and we set those building blocks early, even before they hit preschool and kindergarten, and then go on into quality preschool programs and quality kindergarten programs. I'm very interested in having that discussion with the work that I do in in the fields with high-need families. This is a critical part of those children's education, but I would argue it's a critical part of every child's education.
All right, I've got one lightning round question, so just a quick yes or no, thumbs up or thumbs down here. The corporate private school tax credits automatically increase by 20% every year. The cap does on that, regardless of student growth or any other factors. Is that good public policy or bad public policy?
Bad public policy.
Bad public policy.
All right. Well, I think that's about all the time we have today, so thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Legislative District 8 covers a significant portion of Pinal County and some of Gila County and includes the communities of Coolidge, Florence, Globe, Hayden, Kearney, parts of Casa Grande, and the Gila River Native American community. The two Senate candidates for District 8 are the incumbent Democratic candidate Barbara McGuire and current Republican State Representative Frank Pratt. Mr. Pratt has decided not to participate in this event, so my conversation will be exclusively with Barbara McGuire. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So let's just jump right in. When the school year started, there were more than 2,000 classrooms without a permanent qualified teacher. The Learning Policy Institute just named Arizona as the least attractive state for hiring teachers, largely due to working conditions and compensation. What policies do you support to address this issue and enable public schools to hire, retain, and support teachers?
Well, first of all, I believe this is a crisis. When we have a 2,000 teacher shortage, it's obviously a crisis. Our budget should be prioritizing education. That should be the #1 priority in our state's budget. It's not. We need to bring leadership to the table. We need to bring all the stakeholders to the table. We need to find solutions, affordable solutions that will provide quality education, and we need to pay our teachers at or above national average. We're way below that right now.
I know Republicans have said that more than half the state's budget goes towards education, but you're saying education's not a priority. What is the priority in your mind?
Well, I still think that education needs to be the #1 priority. If half of the budget goes to education, maybe a little more needs to go to education. Quality education and education in and of itself is an economic engine to our state, so everyone benefits.
Okay. Governor Ducey has said that Proposition 123 was the first step in addressing some of the shortfalls in the K-12 system. What are your ideas for the next steps, and what role would you play in building and sustaining the K-12 system?
Prop 123 was a start, but you know, we had a budget surplus, and we had a proposal on the table that would have allowed us, or given us the option to fund education fully without rating or going into our state trust. We also need to close those corporate tax loopholes and the tax giveaways. I think that those also are additional steps that need to be taken to fund education. Again, education should be a priority in Arizona.
Okay. Tell me one thing that you think the state should do to ensure that public schools are held accountable.
Well, I think that public schools are held accountable. I think that some of the private schools should also be held to those same accountability standards. I think that there needs to be oversight for those schools as well. It's not apples to apples, and I think that again, they need to be held accountable under the same conditions that public schools are. Those are public tax dollars.
You're talking about the credits that go to the tax credits that are used at private schools?
Well, yes. And private schools in and of itself, there's no transparency there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. If you support more funding for education, how do you propose paying for it?
Well, again, we can eliminate closing those ineffective and outdated corporate tax loopholes, you know, and I can't remember the prop number, but Governor Brewer initiated a 1-cent sales tax. You know, we may look at going back and having to do that again. I know there's been a lot of talk about eliminating income tax, but if you eliminate income tax in the state of Arizona, at what price do you do that? Our education will suffer dearly if we go down that road. I fear that we're headed down that road to the road of privatization. We'll end up being the haves and have-nots. Those who can afford to pay for education, their kids will get an education. What's going to happen to the rest of us? We can't afford that.
Yeah, since the mid-'90s, actually, the state has consistently cut taxes, and the tax cuts passed since 2009 will reduce general fund collections by about $900 million each year once they're fully phased in. And as you mentioned, talk about eliminating the income tax, which is about 40% of states' revenues. What's your approach to balancing tax policy and education funding in the state Senate?
Well, again, like I said, we cannot totally do away with income tax. I don't want to pay any more taxes than I have to either. I'm sure no one does. But again, at what price do you eliminate that? What's your trade-off? Are people going to pack up their families and leave because they can no longer get their kids the education that they need? What's going to happen to education as an economic engine, you know, in our state? If we can't prepare our kids to be college ready, are we going to end up filling our colleges, our major universities, with students from other states? That's not going to benefit us. That's not going to benefit our kids here in Arizona either.
Okay. Do you support updating or renewing Proposition 301? It currently provides about $550 million every year into the K-12 system and through a sales tax, and it's set to expire in 2021.
That was the proposition I just referred to. Yeah, I would be in favor of that, provided a vote of the people also support it. Mm-hmm. We legislate and are elected to office to represent those people, and I know the families in the district that I represent do want their kids to have a quality education. Only with that quality education are they going to be able to acquire the good jobs of the future.
Okay. Tell me one thing that you would do to increase early education options for Arizona children, and particularly those who come from low-income families.
I would say universal all-day kindergarten is a good first start, and first things first, as well as other early learning opportunities. Data and statistics show that the earlier on that a child starts acquiring education, the bigger the benefit is to them and the better they do in the years ahead of them.
Okay. Yeah, the corporate private school tax credits we talked a little bit about earlier, those automatically increase by 20% every year, the cap in terms of how much can be given to those, regardless of student growth, regardless of inflation or any other factors. Do you feel that that's good public policy?
No, I think that is horrible public policy. Who does that benefit? That benefits the corporations. It doesn't benefit our kids to get a better education. It steals money from our education funding to line the pockets of those large corporations. Those corporations are going to need an educated workforce. Again, where are they going to get that workforce? They're not stepping up to the plate to fund it.
Sure. Now, tell me one thing also that you think the state should do to ensure that there's accountability for empowerment scholarship accounts.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, there needs to be transparency and accountability measures. I think that those, I guess they're called ESAs, is what you're referring to. I think that there is some need for some of the children, but you need to make sure that those dollars are actually being used for those individuals. And without the transparency and accountability, you can't guarantee that. They should not be used for schools that can cherry pick kids that don't have special needs, that aren't military, and use those funding for whatever they want. They need the accountability and transparency to make sure that those dollars are being used wisely and where they should be.
Well, Barbara, thank you very much for sitting down for this conversation. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
This concludes our conversation with the candidates. Now, the next step is yours. Please remember to vote. Election day at the polls is Tuesday, November 8th, and vote-by-mail ballots must be received by election officials by that date. Thank you for watching.